Okay, we are now live again in Austin here. We have Mel Riley as our cleanup speaker. Good crowd here. We're going to follow him as he talks about his Native American, the Native American approach to remote viewing. And as I was trying to discuss this and get a grip on the subject, which is for me is very, very difficult, I think I'm going to pay attention because it sounds rather interesting for someone like me. And take it away, Mel.
Good afternoon. What I'll be doing is I'll give you some data, some examples, some early notes from explorers and other things relating to the Native Americans and things that are associated or
Operator error.
the different ways that, oh, that sounds even better. Echo. The Native Americans were using remote viewing for thousands of years, only they didn't know it was a remote viewing. A little bit about myself. I grew up amongst the Indians. One thing I'd like to get clear right away. I am not a medicine man, and I'm not a shaman. I've just been fortunate enough to be a part of the Native American community. I grew up amongst the Winnebago, the people today known as the Ho-Chunk. The reason they changed their names to the Ho-Chunk is because Winnebago is a rather derogatory term that was given to them by other tribes that they had beat up on. When the French explorers first came across them, they asked these other tribes, the Huron, who are these people? And they said, oh, they're the Winnebagos, which means stinkers. So the Winnebago decided a few years back to change their name to what they call themselves, which is Wachunkra, which means speaks with a big voice. And they did. They were pretty big butt kickers in their day. Until they were decimated by disease, white man's disease, and wars, and so on and so forth. I've also been associated with other Native American cultures, the Menominee in Wisconsin, the Navajo of New Mexico. I have some close friends there that I work with. And it's amazing how I keep running into all these people who are medicine people. And I've been very fortunate to work with some of them who've taken me under their wing. Most of them have now passed on. They're deceased. So there's not many left. And there's not many of the younger people that are taking an interest and keeping the culture alive, especially when it comes to the medicine aspect. I do a lot of reading, of course, and research on Native Americans. I have all my life. Up until recently, I was director of a museum in New London, Wisconsin, where I put my knowledge to good use. In the historical writings, they don't come right out and say Indians were psychic or Indians were remote viewers. We didn't have that term then or whatever. So you have to sometimes kind of read between the lines on these books. And there's very little written about that aspect of Native American culture. But it was there, and it was a big thing. Probably one of the big reasons it wasn't because the earliest writings were probably done by the Jesuits, who really didn't touch on Native American religion, spirituality, and beliefs. They were there to convert the Indian to Christians, and that was about it. And the early explorers had other agendas. They were after furs. They weren't interested in learning more about the culture itself. But going through a lot of books and old writings and histories, and that's what I want to do right now, is cover some of the stuff that I found that can relate to what we call remote viewing. In other words, psychic. The Indians, pretty much across the board, and you know, as I'm talking about Native American Indians because that's what I know about, but we know that other Native cultures, Aborigines in Australia, in Hawaii, the people there, Africa, they all had these same things in common, these ancient cultures, long before we decided that it was scientific and remote viewing. They had been using this stuff for tens of thousands of years, and quite successfully. The only difference is they didn't have to put a label on it, they just accepted it. And one of the big things was that comes up over and over and over in writings on Native Americans is the reliance on visions and dreams. Okay? In one aspect, remote viewing, we're out there grabbing visions and having this experience and bringing it back and writing it down. Also, we talk about dreams. I think Dale Graff probably covered some of the aspects of dreams and how it relates to remote viewing. So the Indians relied very heavily on their visions and their dreams. They also, across the board, all the different cultures, and not all tribes believed in the same thing in the same way. They were as different as Europeans are about Christianity. There were many different ways of looking at the Great Spirit, but across the board, they had some notion of some sort of pervasive supernatural power, the Great Spirit. We call it God. Okay. And the Winnebago people themselves, some of the medicine people I talked to, the idea that I got is that the Winnebago did not insist that existence depends upon sense perceptions alone. Ed Cloud, who I was very close to, claimed that what is thought of, what is felt, and what is spoken, in fact, anything that is brought before your consciousness is a sufficient indication of its existence. And the Native Indians accepted that. It's interesting on how some of the Indians viewed the white. A perfect example is to Indians, Western practice is impolite. And this was noted by a missionary. As a missionary noted over a century and a half ago, and I think this book was written in the 1800s, quote, "They are very much disgusted with the manner they say some white people have of asking questions on questions without allowing them time to give a proper answer to any one of them. They, on the contrary, never ask a second question until they have received an answer to the first. They say of those who do otherwise that they seem as if they wish to know a thing, yet cared not whether they knew it correctly or properly." I think that's quite profound. And I'll try to touch a little bit on some of the differences of the structure of the people in the tribes who would have been considered psychic or remote viewers. Okay. Individuals who have had contact with supernatural beings, persons of the other than human class, through a vision or dream, and thus have acquired special knowledge, are often called shamans, a term that contrasts with priests, those religious leaders who gain their knowledge of religious practice and belief by learning it from other human beings. Are you following me? But such a distinction is of little use when the belief and practice of a particular people is being considered in any depth. As is evident in the above description, the difference between individuals is not that a few have such knowledge and such experience while others have not, but that some have had more. And that it is these individuals who are often referred to as shamans or priests. Nor is the source of such knowledge that characteristic. Shamans may well learn from other human persons as well as persons other than human. Here's an example I came across, an excellent example of ERV, extended remote viewing. Does everybody understand that term? If not, you will after this. This comes out of a book by Frank G. Speck on Penobscot or Penobscot shamanism of the American Anthropological Association memoir. So it's got to be scientific, okay? And here's the story. And like I say, I will try to keep all this formal stuff brief because I think we can get more out of this when we go to a question and answer period. But these are things I think are important, at least to start with an introduction. An old man and his son went hunting. His wife and daughter-in-law did not like to stay at home, so they went with him. They built their camp out of boughs and made a fire in the midst of a shelter. The father and son went out hunting and left the women back at camp alone. They were to be back in 3 days. That's what they thought anyhow. But at the end of 3 days, they did not return. The son's wife got worried and did not know what kept them so long, since it was 4 or 5 days since they had been gone. That night, the mother-in-law, who was very fond of smoking, all of us Indians chain smoke, okay? No, tobacco is a very sacred thing in Native American society. But anyhow, that night the mother-in-law, who was very fond of smoking, lay down near the fire to smoke. Her daughter-in-law was lying in one corner of the camp on the boughs. The old woman told the younger woman that she was going to sleep and dream about where the men were and what they were doing. She's getting ready to do a session. Okay? How about that? Does that sound like remote viewing in a way? Yeah. When she finished smoking, she lay on her back. Finally, the young woman turned and saw a ball of fire come out of the old woman's mouth. She became very frightened. She jumped up and tried to arouse the old woman. She turned her on her side and shook her. Then she believed the old woman to be dead. The ball of fire that came from the old woman's mouth went round and round the camp and around the old woman. The young woman turned her over again, and when she did so, the ball of fire went back into the old woman's mouth. Then she began to move about. She said that she had a long sleep. She said, "Don't worry, they'll be back tomorrow. They have had good luck and are bringing lots of game. Saw them sitting by their fire eating supper." The next day, the hunters appeared with an abundance of game of all sorts. There were also special people, especially in villages, larger villages. It was their job and their sole function to warn of danger, enemies approaching the village, or any danger that might be out there lurking. That was their job, to keep an eye on things, to see things from a distance. Remote viewing, once again. These people were also useful. People would come to them looking for lost objects. If they had misplaced something or whatever, they could come to these people for help and guidance. They were also useful. They were relied heavily upon where to go to find game when times were lean. And with the Native Americans, you really don't hold that status very long unless you produce. okay? And we might cover that in a little bit. And another one of my favorite books, which was actually written by an Indian, Arthur C. Parker, first published in 1927, okay? So he had access to a lot of the old-timers before a lot of this was being lost. And these are some excerpts from his book, okay, that relate to remote viewing and also to remote influencing, which is a non-subject. We don't talk about that, remote influencing. This one's entitled, How Indians Made Magic. There were different kinds of magic. First, there was a kind that was much like mind reading, by which a medicine man or woman, and notice we have medicine women too, okay? In the earlier days, they were very important. There were as many medicine women as there were men. It was not a gender thing. By which a medicine man or woman seemed to be able to see at great distances and tell what is going on. He went into a trance and after a while came out of it and told what he had seen. Strangely enough, there were cases in which the medicine man or woman told the real truth, as returning hunters would testify. Imagine that. Yes. This is a section on how Indians, the book is called the Indian How Book, and how Indians did all these other things. And if you want to take a note, and this is an excellent book, you'd love it. The Indian How Book, and it's all about the how of things, how Indians dressed, how they ate, how they hunted, etc., etc. It's by Arthur C. Parker. There is a Dover edition of 1975, but it's been reprinted so many times, it's such a popular book. But here's another interesting one, how Indians sent signals. And I'm not talking about smoke signals. And this is once again from the book. Marvelous as these methods of signaling may seem, there were medicine men who claimed that they could send their thoughts through the air and make things come to pass afar. Others could send their mind's eyes to distant places and discover what was happening. White explorers have often written of these things, but to say just how it was done must remain for modern medicine men to tell us. It's interesting. Another one, how Indians made magic. And this is a little remote influencing in here, so pay attention. Then there was a kind of magic, much like hypnotism. The conjurers, medicine men, I'm reading this verbatim, so the words aren't mine. Conjurers, that's another interesting word, would talk to a crowd of people or a single person and then make them see strange things. Are you all ready for this? Would you like to see strange things? One old Iroquois told me that the trick was easy enough. Said he, paint pictures on the inside of their skulls. Okay? Wear out their eyes, and they will turn them inward and see what you have painted there. The method was to talk in a dull monotone, repeating again and again what the conjurer wanted his victims to see or do, using in the meantime a shining object like a mirror or something, or a crystal, to flash in the subject's eyes. Of course, the subject must wish very hard to see and do as he is told. You know where this is going, right? He must be interested and obey. Then the trick of hypnotism is easy. To create respect and even fear, the medicine man dressed in queer garments and made mysterious passes. His beating of a tom-tom and flashing of a mica mirror were only to wear out the nerve centers. This done, he turned their eyes inward, and they saw what he had painted on the inside of their skulls. Neat, huh? Now you know how to remote influence. All you have to do is hypnotize the entire audience. Don't laugh, it can be done. I don't know how to do it, or we'd have a lot of fun. But it can be done. And even today, I think there are people who do that as a stage act. It can be done. I had one more in here somewhere on remote influencing. Oh, yes. How Indians talk to animals. And we all hear these fantastic stories about Indians are so close to animals that they actually understand each other and so on and so forth. Well, in a way they do. And here's how it was done. This is a quote. In my boyhood days, there was an old Indian. It's always an old Indian, you know. I can't wait until I get old. Then people can talk about me. In my boyhood days, there was an old Indian who impressed me greatly. It was rumored that he could talk to animals and that they actually understood him. This was hard to believe, and I debated much about it, arguing that I couldn't see how animals could understand his language when they didn't talk it. At that time, I did not know that language was only the effort of the mind to signal by means of symbols, and that the words spoken were only symbols for thoughts. This can be applied to remote viewing too. It is not the words so much, said Corn Planter, the old man, not the words so much as what we think when we say the words. The animals catch what we think, and sometimes no words need be spoken. In other words, in the back of the horse's skull, paint that picture. Remember, we mentioned about the reliance of Indians on visions and dreams. And it also goes along with how they prepared to reach these visions or dreams. And oftentimes it was through fasting. Other times a vision would occur through ceremonies such as a sun dance that involve what white man looks at as torture or whatever. It's not really. And if I don't, remind me to explain a little, touch on the sun dance before it's over with, because a lot of people think it's torture and the whole thing is ridiculous, but it's not. Anyhow, fasting and dreams among the Ojibwe Indians. The Ojibwe are also from Wisconsin. You'll notice that I use mostly Wisconsin tribes. These are the people that I'm more familiar with, I grew up with. And by the way, I'm still involved with. I'm a member of the Mohican Nation veterans group, so on and so forth. I go to powwows, I dance, I get involved in rituals, ceremonies, some sacred, some secular. So anyhow, fasting and dreams among the Ojibwe. Fasting is a practice. Now you have to understand though, that some of these books were written long ago, okay? And when it says fasting is practice still to be found, very rarely do you find that common amongst the Native Americans. Fasting is a practice still to be found among the Ojibwe Indians of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and very likely in other places. It is done for various reasons, such as a desire for a spiritual cleansing of the soul, to introduce dreams and visions as a sacrifice to the Great Spirit, and for the purpose of curing bodily ills. It is a belief among the more traditional Ojibwe Indians that fasting is a means for solving some of the problems of life, as well as obtaining relief from certain bodily ills. When I questioned Ojibwe Indians as to the importance they attached to dreams, some interesting answers were received. Some said that dreams were responsible for some of the designs they used in making handicrafts such as beadwork and carved wooden articles. Others stated dreams played a role in the making of protective charms that they gave to certain persons. The writer was also told that at times songs, especially those of a religious nature, were inspired by dreams, even if the dream occurred only once. Dreams are not always the result of fasting, however, but can be induced by intense concentration on some particular thing, according to some Indians. By concentration on some particular thing, like ideograms. You know, once again, there are some similarities here. The writer was told of dreams which certain Indians had, which concerned important events in their lives, such as impending disaster, a future happening, or the coming of some person. Precognition. Among the North American Indian, particularly the Algonquins, the faculty of experiencing dreams that are considered to be of great significance seems to be more or less an inherent trait. In other words, it was noticed that most Indians could do this, or experience this, or sought this. They accepted the fact that everyone could do it. However, they also knew that some were better than others, and these were the ones that were thought of as shamans or holy men or medicine men. Okay? So it was more or less of an inherent trait. These momentous dreams are more in the nature of visions or revelations, and are conditioned by the ability of the individual to induce them. In other words, they're saying, let's sit down and do a session. They induced these visions, these dreams. Now, when we were writing this, we didn't have these technical terms relating to remote viewing that we have. So you have to kind of read between the lines. As the Medewin, and this is the Grand Medicine Lodge Society of the Ojibwe Indians. It was a super secret society of medicine men and women that were created and were a separate group. As the Medewin gradually disappears, another practice becomes more widespread with each passing year. It involves persons who have the ability to protect others from sickness and evil through the power of dreams. There is no discernible organization, nor are there any specific rites binding the dreamers in a common union as in the Medicine Lodge. This is rather peculiar, since what evidence we have indicates that the practices of the dreams stem directly from the Grand Medicine Lodge. Once again, relating to remote viewing. They're going into the dream state, an altered state, the remote viewing, to help cure sickness and things of that nature. So, I can also think of a quick example, and you can probably all relate to it. You're all familiar with the Battle of the Little Bighorn, General Custer, Sitting Bull, so on and so forth. One thing should probably set straight, Sitting Bull was never a chief. He was a holy man. He was a religious leader. He was a leader, but he was not a chief. And Sitting Bull did not participate in the Battle of the Little Bighorn. He was unable to. He was so weakened by the Sundance ceremony that he had just completed that all he could do was direct things from the village, from the camp, as the other warriors went out and did battle with the U.S. troops. But this is an account of what really happened with Sitting Bull. In early June of 1876, Sitting Bull knew that a showdown with the United States government was near at hand. The 45-year-old holy man bound the stem of his ceremonial pipe with sprigs of fresh-picked sage. Accompanied by 3 witnesses, he climbed to the top of a lonely butte to seek guidance and inspiration from the Great Spirit. Below him, along the banks of the Rosebud Creek, the teepees of 15,000 Sioux and their Cheyenne and Arapaho allies stretched for nearly 3 miles. There were a lot of Indians there. That was a big encampment. The reason there were so many in one place at one time, because they were gathered for the annual Sundance. Okay? And Sitting Bull said, as he was seeking his vision, his dream, he was going into his remote viewing, he said, let good men on earth have more power. That's what he was praying for. Let the good man on earth have more power. Sitting Bull prayed, let them be of good heart so that all people may get along well and be happy. Then he vowed to participate in the annual Sundance, which is the most holy of Lakota rituals. At a special camp beside the Rosebud where the Sundance was held, Sitting Bull offered Wakantanka, or the Great Spirit, a scarlet blanket. Scarlet blanket is 100 squares of his flesh, 50 squares of flesh cut out of each arm. And all is pierced through the skin, is lifted up, and it's sliced off. 100 pieces of flesh. He was in a lot of pain and lost a lot of blood. That's one aspect of the Sundance. It sounds horrible, but believe me, you can go into an altered state real easy before that's over with. You know, and he wasn't under any anesthetic or anything. But he did this as a sacrifice. He was sacrificing himself for his people, okay? So that was the object of that. So then he danced after 100 squares of flesh were cut from him. He danced all day and all night and part of the next day until he fainted from exhaustion. That's when he had his vision. In his disembodied state, Sitting Bull received a vision, a dream of many upside-down white soldiers falling like grasshoppers into the Indians' camp. There's a significance in upside down. That means dead, already dead, death. And in fact, Indian grave markers, what they used to identify the individual was by his clan sign, and if his clan totem, if it were a bear or a pigeon or a hawk or an eagle, if that were upside down, that meant he was dead. Well, in Sitting Bull's vision, he saw all these soldiers falling into camp upside down. And the rest is history. Oh boy, I'm getting almost to the end. I'm getting to the fun part. This is so boring, but I hope you're getting something out of it, an idea of it'll help give you an idea of what kind of questions you want to ask. I've got a section here on the dangers of becoming a shaman or medicine man, or the dangers of becoming a remote viewer. This could apply, by the way. In all Indian societies, medicine men were expected to put their powers to use for the good of the community. You were expected to do good with it, not evil. Besides healing, they might be asked to foretell future events, recover lost objects, cast love spells, communicate with the spirits of departed relatives, or bring good weather. Among the Sioux and many other cultures, they had a leadership role in organizing hunting expeditions and war parties. It was they who directed the warriors in search of game or foe, although once the target was sighted, other tribal leaders took command. Such responsibilities could be daunting. If a warrior was killed on a raid or a hunt, that the medicine man had judged favorably, the community might blame the medicine man, and in rare cases may even sentence him to death. In other words, too many wrong answers in your history. But you notice it said in rare cases. Usually you were just humiliated and told to take a hike. Going on, as one holy man or one medicine man complained to an outsider, in our forefathers' day, the shamans and medicine men were solitary men. But now they are all priests or doctors, whether prophets or conjurers, producing games or clever merchants selling their skills for pay. That's an easy trap to fall into, isn't it? Another spoke of the pain and loneliness that one must endure to acquire such knowledge. True wisdom, he said, is only to be found far away from people, out in the great solitude, and is not found in play, but only through suffering, and is found through suffering. Solitude and suffering open the human mind, and therefore a shaman seeks his wisdom there. Oh, that concludes the formal part. What I'd like to do is open the floor to questions, because that's what I'm better at anyhow.
Okay, again, the protocols are in place that I've got a very short cord here. If you want to ask a question, please come form a line back here behind the line side of the camera. Because we do like you, but we don't want to photograph the back of your head. Oh, go ahead, that's good enough.
Why didn't they make better military use of the IRVA? Or could they in some way?
They did. They did. The Iroquois had their IRVA, their medicine man, who sat in the village and warned them of impending danger and such things. They would always consult their medicine man before they went on a raid to know where the enemy was, how many there were, and how to overcome them. It's like anything else, though. It's hard to achieve 100% accuracy in remote viewing, and sometimes the bad thing happened. Also, that it's a fact that in most cases, when dealing with the Europeans or the U.S. government, the Indians were usually outgunned and outnumbered about 10 to 1, so they really didn't stand much of a chance. But no, they made quite good use of the remote viewers.
Okay, we have another question.
There's a comment, Mel. Only a week ago, Kreskin did this painting on the inside of the skull routine. In Las Vegas, he put out $50,000, said he would send it to a charity if what he was going to do didn't work. And what he said would happen was that there would be a crowd of people who would see UFOs. And then at the Silverton casino, he had one of his shows, and then as part of that, he did some hypnotic kinds of things, and to those that were susceptible, which he said stay and the rest can go, he went through them with a routine and said, when I drop my handkerchief, when we're out in the field, you'll see UFOs. So then they all trooped out to the field at the end of the show, and he did a little palaver, and then he dropped his handkerchief, and there were these dozens of people saying, oh my God, look at it, there are UFOs all over the place. And meanwhile, the film crews were out there because this had gotten a lot of advanced publicity, and the cameras didn't see anything. But nonetheless, these people, and then he had them come up to the stage and relate their stories. And in the end, his point was actually, he had a political point to make, was that dealing with terrorists and so on, that people in this country don't take as much cognizance as they should of how there can be mental influence on groups by just such techniques as he was doing.
And look at it, It's an old Indian trick. There's nothing new under the sun. This stuff has been around for thousands of years. We're just reinventing it again and putting labels on it, you know. The difference between us and them is we try to figure out how it works. Well, the natives just, they accepted that it was there. Let's find the people who are talented and use them.
Another question here?
Yeah, I'd like to add to what he said and what you're saying about the Indians and remote viewing. 3 weeks after 9/11, during a powwow we had in Odessa, Texas, the EMC, I forget his tribe from Oklahoma, I was telling him about a dream I had about 9/11, and he was telling me about a dream that one of their elders in Oklahoma in the reservation had. He's 81 years of age, spoke no English, I forget what the tongue was. Not educated, probably didn't know what the World Trade Center was all about or if it existed in his mind. But he said he saw two buildings. It seemed like he was telling me they kind of sleep in the porch or wherever, and they sleep and they have these revelations and visions. It's normal for them, they're up in age. But he saw the two buildings with a missile hit in it and the screams of the people. And the other elder saw this building with 5 corners. And this lady with a stick with a flame holding. This was all like several weeks before 9/11. So anyway, it's happening in the reservations.
Oh yes, oh yes. How well I know.
Okay, another one?
Hi, Mel.
This has got to be a loaded one if Cleve's going to ask it.
A little bit, because what I wanted to ask is, I know you know all the relationships between remote influencing and the Indians and whatnot, and obviously they have objects and things that they use for their settling down and in their rituals and things. And I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about whether or not some of these objects were able to retain any, or if they have any sort of significance that can be passed on, like an amulet or different things of that sort, or if there's any significance to that.
I think I know where you're going with that one. First of all, we have to look at the Native Indians' view on the universe and his philosophy. As a general rule, throughout most of the Native Indian cultures, they look upon the great mystery or the great spirit, our equivalent of God, as creating everything, the universe, the stars, planet Earth, and everything that is here. That is animate, inanimate, everything that's living, even rocks, mountains, lakes, rivers, streams. These were all created by the great Creator. Therefore, in their belief structure, they are just as deserving of recognition and respect as human beings. They are equals. They considered the animals, the animal kingdom, their brothers and sisters, their uncles and aunts, their relatives. That's the type of relationship they thought of it, okay, the way they thought. Because the Great Spirit created the mountains and the rocks and the rivers and the streams, they felt that these things that were created by God have a certain level of consciousness and a spirit. If God created man and gave man a spirit and a consciousness, then he must have done it for all of his creation. Therefore, the Indians believed truly that the animals, the animal kingdom, had their own spirits, their own souls, their own helpers. Rivers and streams had, in a way, their own consciousness. Albeit different than human consciousness, it was aware. when they had to kill an animal for food or clothing, they knelt beside the animal and made an offering of tobacco or the animal's favorite food, and would pray for the animal, pray for the animal to forgive him for having to do that, and go back, when his spirit goes back to the animal heaven, to say good things about him and his people, so that other animals would sacrifice and forfeit their lives for the welfare of the people. This is how the Indians thought. Even objects, certain objects, the Indians recognized as having a little more power than others, more consciousness. These objects would become sacred, powerful objects. You could pray through these objects because it's like some people use crystals to amplify their prayers, so on and so forth. Not every rock was a sacred rock, but it was respected because, in a way, it was sacred. But some had more power than others, and these would become parts of medicine bundles and so on and so forth, would be used in rituals and ceremonies and serve that function. So does that answer your question pretty much on that?
Okay. And another question? Come on over here. Don't be afraid.
Just a quick question. Could you explain what a peace chief is and what their rank was in the Indian culture? Were they seers? Were they medicine men? Where did they fit in? Is there even such a thing, or is that a white man's fabrication?
It's a white man's interpretation. There were leaders, okay? And they were not leaders because of hereditary or anything else. Some of them had a hereditary line, but that wasn't how, let's call them, I guess we'll use white man's terms, chiefs, peace chiefs and stuff. There was usually a very strong leader who was considered a peace chief. He would be like our president or a mayor of the city or something like that. It was his job to keep the society, the community moving and rolling, keep peace between this clan and that clan, and suggest options other than going to war with dealing with other nations and tribes and other peoples. His role was to maintain peace and stuff throughout the community. And I hope that answers that part of it. There was also another leader who was known as the war chief. He was the general. And of course he had his officers and enlisted men and all these other things down the line, but he was the commander-in-chief. He was the general. And he took care of all those things. Now, in order to become a chief, you had to display those qualities. And it was not a matter of being elected or something like that. The people accepted you and respected you, and therefore put you in that position because they trust you. If you screwed up, you were out of office, okay? What's interesting, amongst the Iroquois nations, such as the Seneca, Mohawk, Onondaga, Cayuga, and so on and so forth, the women of the tribe were the ones who elected the chiefs, okay? It was the women who owned the property, the house, and things of that nature. The only thing the men owned were their weapons and whatever they could carry with them.
Pretty much like today.
Yes, yes. And if a woman decided that you were a big enough jerk, you'd come home one day and your belongings would be set outside the lodge, and that was a good indication that you were no longer welcome. So, Yes. And she kept the house and everything in it. However, the women of the Iroquois were actually the peacekeepers, the diplomats, and so on and so forth. They elected the chiefs. And that the chiefs did not perform satisfactorily, they also had the authority to fire them. Okay? So the women played a very important role there. Now, when the white Europeans came upon the scene, they messed up that whole thing of a chief leading by consent, because normally the white people could not take a man of that stature and mold them into their way of doing things. They couldn't ply them with whiskey or money or anything else. So what they did was they kind of blackmailed everybody, and they appointed, the white man appointed a chief that they're going to deal with, someone that they can manipulate, okay? And it went all downhill from there, as you know. For the Indian, for the white man, it worked out great. But most of these great chiefs that you hear about were created by the white Europeans and Americans.
I'll just have to throw one question in there, and then we have the final question behind me here. How do you talk about the great reverence for life and taking of food and such like that? How do you resolve that with the war aspect, the violence, the torture, mutilation as an integral part of their culture when they're fighting against an adversary? How do you resolve that? It's a genuine question.
Well, first of all, let's get things in perspective. The American Indian did not wage these huge battles where they went out to wipe out an entire group of people or anything like that. They didn't have these huge battles where, you know, it was a big control thing or whatever. Normally, they were little skirmishes over things of honor, or sometimes it was over survival. In other words, a lucrative hunting ground with lots of game on it. You got these poor guys over here who are starving, they invade your territory. But you have to control that territory or your people are going to starve, okay?
Well, I understand
But these were small skirmishes.
Yeah,
okay.
of course, but how do you resolve that then if he's going to go out and hunt for deer and he's so reverent to that one deer for his survival, and you have a settler trying, you know, a farmer out there in the middle of nowhere that's encroaching upon, quote, his area, and they get attacked and stuff. Did they treat that settler and farmer after they killed him?
They treated them just as fairly as they would an opposing native. They killed them or they tortured them, like they, you know, if that was within their structure. I mean, they didn't single him out. They treated him just like they would any other American Indian.
All right, I understand that. I just wanted to try to resolve this reverence for life of animals and such like that. I don't mean to monopolize, but with the aspect of war against a human life. But
yeah, but see, a lot of that warfare also was a matter of honor. It was more of a game. It was a deadly game, however, but the Indian, knowing that the nature of mankind, you cannot go without this killing thing, so they had to create something that really wouldn't decimate the people, the villages, or whatever. So warfare itself actually kind of became a deadly game or a field of honor. Right, well, the counting coup thing, and that's very interesting because it was, the highest honor was not to kill your enemy and take his scalp. The highest honor would be to go in the midst of battle with witnesses, touch your enemy, humiliate him, yank him off his horse, and go la 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 la, turn around and run away. You know, that was the biggest honor. There was no honor in killing an enemy. And in fact, amongst the Winnebago people, the highest honor in battle was to be the third or the fourth person to touch that enemy after he was killed. Now, the reason I say that, that's not so easy. That body is out in the middle of the battlefield, and you're going to be the fourth guy to run up there, and the enemy's already got, you know, they know what you're going to do. They're waiting for you. So that took a lot of guts.
Yeah, I'd measure that in different terms, but because we have our different cultural standards and such. But I have a question here.
Thanks, Mel. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm real curious. You mentioned the shaman's technique for achieving clairvoyance is solitude and suffering. What do you recommend for us?
Marriage.
What can I say? I already answered my question. No, I'll address that. You know, the Indians weren't the ones who dreamt that up either. You know, Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, the Indians were not the ones who invented this this thing of suffering or whatever. You go back to the Bible, you know, out into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. That sounds like a fast to me, you know, go out into the desert, into the solitude. That's the type of suffering they're talking about. You know, not to go out and jump off a cliff or whatever, but, you know, suffering, solitude, and things. Yes?
How do you account for the Beaver Wars from the middle 1600s to 1703, when 3 of the Iroquois tribes made war against 30 nations, drove them to the Mississippi, north into Sudbury, Ontario, exterminated the Wenro and the Eries. They were armed by the British and the Dutch.
I was just going to say.
The French rearmed them, they made war and drove back and sued for peace in 1703.
That was all under white European influence.
Right.
Yeah, the Europeans had them do that.
They weren't kind at that time.
Migration and conflict is a history of mankind. Okay, thank you very much, Mel. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. You gotta like this guy. Very good job, very good job. Thank you again. I gotta like him. I like anybody who's shorter than me.